Chapter 23. The 'tween decks spawns its litter. Whiskey is the life of man, whiskey, Johnny. I'll drink whiskey while I can, whiskey for my Johnny. Halyard Shanty. Why wouldn't they leave him alone? Just when he was dropping into a quiet, restful sleep, there was somebody jerking his shoulder. Was it his watch on deck? Somebody was lifting him, dragging him across a hard edge. The sweet music was gone now. There were voices, thin and far away. He'd been a goner in another minute. Noticed the log had stopped. The kid was hanging on to it, fighting off the Goonies with a knife. God, man, what a fight he must have put up. 10 Goonies dead if there was one. Goonies. A fight. The voices drew closer. He was in a boat. He had been drowning, but Nick Prebinson had saved him. Bert tried to sit up. He was terribly cold. There was something he wanted to say, but he couldn't remember what. It was about a shriveled man with lips that jerked back over yellow teeth. Dopey J. What about him? Oh, yes. He'd fallen overboard. The men were rowing back to the bark. Bert struggled to speak, but his teeth began to chatter so that he could hardly get the words out of his mouth. Where's Dopey J? He asked. Where's who? Was there another one? Yes. Dopey J. China gang. He threw me over, and I dragged him over with me. Can't you get him? No. He's gone long ago, kid, and good riddance. But you must hunt for him, the boy protested. All right, we'll hunt for him, someone soothed, and satisfied, Bert allowed himself to be laid down again and covered with a coat. A few minutes later, there was a creaking of tackle. Bert was dimly aware that the boat was being hoisted back to the deck of the bark. He was lifted again and carried to the poop, though he made feeble efforts to get down and walk. In the sun, in the lee of the chart house, friendly hands stripped off his wet clothing and rubbed his body with rough towels. Once during the process, he roused himself to ask, "It was Nick who saved me, wasn't it?" "Ach, Gott, no, my boy," a voice answered. "Nick is dead. It was the mate who saw you, and old Smith here, who cut your arm and dragged you into the boat." Bert relaxed again with a sigh. He felt himself rolled into blankets, and then he slept. When he awoke, wonderfully refreshed, he found himself in his bunk in the lazarette. His eyes lighted on the solid form of Fred von Bergen, sitting on a sea chest and smoking his finely carved meerschaum pipe. The boy smiled at his friend and stretched luxuriously. "Have I slept very long?" he asked. "No," the German answered slowly. "I would say it was not so long under the circumstances. It is only 15 hours. 15 hours? Bert sprang out of his bunk and began rummaging in his sea bag for dry clothing. "Then I have missed my watch on deck." "Yes, and you have missed more than that, too." Bert started to ask about Dopey J and then stopped. He remembered the creaking tackle. They had not even looked for the hophead. Of course, there would have been no use. He must have gone down almost at once. Still. What did I miss beside my watch, Fred? "In the night, there was a little raid up above. Some of the Schweinhunds from between decks stole all the rifles from the chart house." "Stole all the rifles? Sweet patootie, whose watch was it?" "Poker Gust's watch," said the German. "He was below having coffee. I was at the wheel, but I could not leave. Also, there were 10 of them, maybe 15. It is too bad." "And the ammunition, did they get that too?" Von Bergen chuckled. "Did I call them pig dogs? So? That is too kind. They are imbeciles. They are the offal of civilization. They are the spawn of the 'tween decks, and the 'tween decks is a filthy dam." "But the ammunition, Fred, they didn't get it." No, my boy. They have the guns. We have the ammunition. Bert heaved a sigh of relief and stood gazing reflectively at his bandaged right hand. Then that puts us just where we were before, he said. Just then old Smith stepped into the lazarette. The gleam in his eyes and an unusually quick step betrayed his excitement. Why, hello, partner, Bert greeted him. What's happened? 2 rifles, he said tersely. The chief mate went down and got 'em. Leaves gang only 4, and no ammunition. Only 4? The boy breathed. But Fred said they got them all. The old man shrugged his bent shoulders. There were only 6. But the box was heavy, the boy protested. I thought there were... Bluff, said the old man. Scrap iron. There was no money for guns, the German explained. But for the moral effect, the box should be heavy, so... The boy made a wry face. I guess the moral effect has worn off by this time, he said. Tonight they will probably come after the ammunition for their 4 guns. Yes, said von Bergen, in the first watch. Why then? Bert asked. Poker Gust's watch, said the German. There was a long silence. It was the first intimation the boy had had that others shared his suspicion of the second mate. Was it possible that the skipper was blind to the second's treachery? Could he call it accident that the raid on the chart house had been made during Poker Gust's watch? And what if a second raid in Poker Gust's watch netted them the precious ammunition? Would the skipper treat that as another coincidence? Bert felt suddenly ill and sat down weakly on a box. What was the matter with his stomach? Von Bergen puffed thoughtfully on his meerschaum. Who helped that dirty hophead throw you over? He asked. Bert started. Why, I thought he was alone. No, I remember now. Dopey J put the hammerlock on me, but someone twisted my foot. There must have been 2 of them. Huh, snorted Old Smith. I didn't think that monkey-faced polecat could do it alone. Bert grinned. Whatever happened now, he would have to live up to Old Smith's faith in him. If only he didn't have that queer feeling in the pit of his stomach. He hadn't eaten anything. Why, that was it, of course. He hadn't eaten anything. He was hungry. Before he reached the door, Charlie Hansen entered and motioned for him to wait. The seaman looked up expectantly. Captain's orders, the third snapped. Be ready for an attack at any time. Have whatever weapons you can find and get to the poop at the first alarm. Tell the others when they wake up. He indicated 3 or 4 heavily breathing men in the bunks. Then he turned and strode out. Bert followed him to the deck and forward as far as the midship deckhouse, which the third entered. To warn the rest of the crew, the boy thought. From the galley in the forward deckhouse came the voice of the cook, bellowing a tuneless, senseless song. Lower your funnel and stop your ship and reeve your anchor chain. Throw your cargo overboard and haul it back again. That meant that Joe Bloom was in a good humor. What? He cried when Bert explained his need for a handout. You missed both supper and breakfast? Then take the easy chair while I fix you some fried chicken and sweet potatoes. Bert sat on the coal bin where he was bidden. In a surprisingly short time, the cook thrust a hot plate of ham and eggs into his hands. Help yourself to coffee, he directed. Here's the canned cow. Bert ate with an enthusiasm and singleness of purpose that quite won the cook's heart. With brawny bare arms folded across his chest, Joe Bloom stood watching the boy. Think that'll hold you till noon, kid? Or do you want a second? This'll do, Bert said seriously. But I hope you serve plenty for dinner. It's going to take me several meals to catch up. The cook looked startled for a moment, then laughed good-naturedly. 39 years, boy and man, I've followed the sea, he said. But I've never seen a green kid take to this life as natural as you do. Behind him, as he started aft again, Bert heard the clip-clump of the cook's tread, beating ragged time to his song. Haul your lifeboats up aloft when the storm begins to blow. The boy was grateful to the wooden-legged cook for his tact in not mentioning the incident of the day before, which accounted for his missing 2 meals. Joe Bloom knew about it, of course, since beyond a doubt it had been a topic of conversation in the mess, but Bert didn't like to think about it. Probably it would be difficult to find a man who could be more easily spared than Dopey Jay, but after all, he was a human being, and Bert, however unwillingly, had had a hand in his death. Somewhere many miles astern. No, he didn't want to think about that. Abreast of the mizzenmast, Bert suddenly stopped and gazed wonderingly about the deck. What was wrong? Why, the China gang, where were they? Instead of the usual 75 or 100 loafing tween-deckers, the boy saw a scant dozen, and these, he realized with a shudder, were furtively watching him. What did it mean? Turning back the few steps to the midship deckhouse, Bert paused in front of the bulletin board to look at Sparks' daily position notice. It read, May 27th, 8 p.m., 750 miles south of Unimac Pass. That meant, at a guess, a little less than 700 miles now. 3 days' sail or 3 weeks' sail, depending on the wind, before they would reach the pass. And after that, there was a 300-mile stretch of Bering Sea to cover before they would reach the mouth of the Nushagak River. Many things could happen in that uncertain time. Remembering the third's order from the captain, Bert picked up a capstan bar and hefted it as he walked aft. It was fully twice the weight of the heaviest baseball bat he had ever swung. Not a bad weapon, he reflected, as long as there was room to wield it. His two friends were still sitting in the lazarette, and two of the other seamen were alike lying propped up on their elbows. From the way they all looked at him when he entered, the boy surmised that he had been the subject of their conversation. He noticed that during his absence the German had strapped a holster about his waist, and that from the holster protruded the butt of a Luger pistol. That he knew how to use it was a foregone conclusion, and Bert knew that he would feel that he was doing humanity a service by using it on the China gang with freedom and accuracy. A shiver ran down the boy's spine. One of the seamen started to say something and stopped. Every man in the lazarette stiffened at the sound of running feet in the corridor. A small figure came hurtling into the room, wide-eyed, and with a widening stain of red on his shirt over his left side. Bert sprang to his feet. "You're hurt, Bill." "It's nothing," gasped Bill Billings. "Saw me sneak out. Threw a knife. Tell Captain quick. Going to attack. Right away." He collapsed in a heap. With an appealing glance at von Bergen, Bert raced for the door. Down the corridor he ran, turned to the right past the officers' mess, and crashed against the door of the captain's quarters. The door burst open, and he almost fell inside. He caught one glimpse of the captain's back as he sat at his table. Then he looked into the muzzle of an automatic in the steady hand of the barque's master. "The gang," Bert panted. "Going to attack. Now." Captain Hagestrom lowered his gun and leapt for the door. "Lock the bulkhead door, then call the chief mate," the captain snapped, and he was gone up the stairs to the poop. Bert ran back to the corridor and forward to its end. In the fraction of a second that passed before he could slam the iron door and throw the bolt, he saw the main deck, deserted a few minutes before, was now fairly alive with men. The 'tween decks had spawned its litter. The crashing of the door in the bulkhead next the chief mate's stateroom must have brought him out of his bunk like a flash, for when Bert thrust his head inside the room, the mate was hastily pulling on his boots. As the boy ran back to the inside stairway, the capstan bar still clutched in his hands, he heard the thump of the mate's boots close behind him. On the poop above, the wheelhouse bell was clattering insistently. The captain, the third mate, the German, and old Smith were already on the poop when Bert and the chief mate arrived. A moment later, the 4 other seamen from the lazarette reached the poop, armed with clubs and knives, and just one jump behind them came Sparks with a monkey wrench, and the steward and mess boy with pantry knives. A pitiful army, Bert thought, to give battle to 200 drug-crazed down-and-outers. If only the rest of the crew could get aft, but there was no way. The waist of the vessel was packed with the milling mass of the China gang. Now the familiar hum of the 'tween decks was ended, and in its stead there came a deep-throated murmur, which rose gradually to a murderous roar. "Behind cover, everyone!" commanded the captain. Von Bergen, help Mr. Jensen keep the ladder head clear. Bert saw an automatic in the chief mate's hand. You, Johansen, the captain thrust one of the precious rifles into the seaman's hands as he spoke. Keep them from climbing up the starboard bulwarks. Smith, take the port bulwarks. The rest of you, stand by for hand-to-hand fighting. Then, in a low voice, the skipper added, shoot to disable. Mein Gott, disable. The German laughed mirthlessly. You would shoot mad dogs to disable. If I miss, I will disable, and I will not miss often. Captain Hagestrom did not seem to hear von Bergen's answer, but the others threw him approving glances. From the little group of defenders huddled abaft the chart house, those with guns and appointed places crept forward to the shelter of jiggermast and skylights. Bert crouched behind a ventilator at the port side of the chart house, gripping the edge of the cowl with one hand and the oak capstan bar with the other. He wished the captain had given him a rifle. But no, he didn't want to kill men, unless he had to. From the midst of the packed tween-deckers, a pistol barked. As though the shot were a signal, the mass of men began to move aft. A pistol cracked from the poop. Crouching behind the port skylight beside Old Smith, von Bergen leveled his Luger toward the ladderhead, and it spoke twice. Black and brown, frenzied faces showed above the edge of the poop, swarming up the port bulwarks. Bert saw Old Smith rise to one knee and swing the rifle to his shoulder. The heart of the watching boy beat against his ribs as though it would rival the crack of the guns. The attack had come.